everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver here in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen where cooking meets culture. And I'm thrilled today to welcome another Stephanie. It's a meeting of the Stephanies. This is Stephanie Harper, and her debut novel, Wesley, Yorstead Goes Outside, is launching in less than a week. So we're very excited to welcome you. Welcome to the kitchen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So this is one of those books that I could not put down. I was instantly engrossed. And so I'm going to just start just there because the novel is set essentially inside a Denver apartment. And the title does give you a clue that going outside is a big deal for this character, right?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Wesley. How did you develop him?
Sure. So Wesley is a 33-year-old graphic novelist who also has a severe case of agoraphobia. So at the beginning of the novel, he hasn't left his house in over 5 years, or his apartment, in over 5 years. And this has brought on some other issues with obsessive tendencies and fear of death and dying and anxiety and germs and all sorts of things that he's sort of working through at the start of the novel. So the book really started because I just wanted to answer the question, what would it be like to not be able to leave your apartment or your home? And he sort of just blossomed in my mind from there, and that's how the story developed.
And so, of course, you were writing this probably 2 or 3 years ago. No idea a pandemic was going to be showing up this year.
Yeah.
But many of us would be stuck in our homes for months on end. And so, very similar to your co-press author, Susanna Drissy's Until We're Fish, there's all these themes that the pandemic this feels so almost prophetic. And
Sure.
This notion of cleaning the groceries and worrying about stuff being set on the floor and washing his hands and people bringing germs into his apartment. It really honestly felt like you had a crystal ball in some ways when you were writing it. So, but that's just how it works sometimes. So I'm going to have you read that first passage that I asked, because I think this main character, you're really inside his head for most of the book. And so I selected 2 short passages for Stephanie to read for us. And the first one will give you a feel for kind of Wesley's frame of mind.
All right. Monday afternoon bathes the apartment in an unmistakable gloom of something starting over again. I don't have weekends in a physical sense because my habits are no different on a Saturday or Sunday than any other day. But Mondays still bear a particular heaviness. Perhaps it's some part of my subconscious forcing me to keep track of each new week. It's easy to lose myself in the space of my apartment, which operates on its own time, away from the ticking of the rest of the world. Maybe this feeling in my stomach, in my joints, this overall sensation of being weighted down as though my body is full of sand, is a reminder that even here, time does go by. Or maybe it's because when I have a project with a deadline, Mondays mark the entrance of my colorist.
Thank you. So does that sound familiar to anyone or feel familiar to anyone? Really amazing. And I think it gives you a feeling for this main character who is highly sympathetic. I felt like I was in his skin. And you also did a beautiful job of bringing his artwork to life, his graphic novels. And I love that he's still a productive member of society, even though he has this disability that is keeping him indoors. Tell me briefly, how did you research his condition?
Sure. So, I had a somewhat, I would say, stereotypical understanding of agoraphobia prior to beginning the novel. I think we've all sort of seen those examples of like the Howard Hughes type figures, but I really wanted to be, as true and as real to people who are going through this as I could. So the first thing that I did was really study up on medical journals, try to understand what the diagnostic criteria are for agoraphobia, look at the spectrum of agoraphobia, because obviously not every person who has agoraphobia never leaves their house. This is the most extreme example of the disorder. And I also spent some time looking at online message boards, talking to people in support groups, because I really wanted to create a language and a vocabulary for what Wesley is feeling when he's having a panic attack or his anxiety is elevated, that made sense to other people with agoraphobia. So, I looked for sort of shared language in the ways that people described their symptoms and tried to integrate that into my writing as well.
Yeah, well, and I think you just did a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
So he's kind of got his life like super well organized. He has a therapist who comes to him. His colorist comes to him. He has a whole cleaning system that he does. Those two people basically are the only people that he allows in his apartment. And then he has his groceries delivered. And again, this is another thing that is so relevant to the pandemic, because we've all gone through this process of how safe are the groceries? Do we have to disinfect everything? And so he has this whole system set up. And then in literature and also in screenplays, there's something called an inciting incident, meaning something changes and that sort of sets the whole story in motion. And so what changes? Someone arrives who isn't usually there.
Yeah, so the inciting incident is really when he has a new grocery delivery person show up on his doorstep unannounced. And that person is named Happy Lafferty. She's a 25-year-old young woman who is actually working at her father's grocer. And you can tell that Wesley has been, using this same grocer for years, is comfortable with his grocery delivery person, whose name is Angel. So when this very vibrant, redheaded young woman shows up on his doorstep unannounced with his groceries, he's definitely thrown for a loop.
Yeah. And so she comes into his apartment. She becomes his grocery person. Other things happen. She brings at least one other person shows up in his apartment that wouldn't have been otherwise. We don't do spoilers on this show, but I just want to kind of give you a feeling for, and then they kind of become friends. She ends up staying with him for a little while. And so she's decided that they're going to have a dinner party, which, if you can imagine this character, nothing about this is anything that he wants, but he's kind of going along with it. And so she makes a dish that she calls Cupid's Lasagna. So I'm going to bring over the lasagna because, of course, I had to pre-bake it, so it's already baked and been sitting out for a while. But I'm going to just show it off and talk about it very briefly, and then I'm going to have you read about the lasagna. So this one is gluten-free, and it's used a red sauce. I'll share the link to that particular red sauce, Mama Capra's marinara, which is amazing. It's got spinach in it because Happy did make it with spinach. And then it's a little lighter on the cheese, and then I do like more of a plant-based ricotta substitute, so a little bit lighter in the dairy just for me, but you can make it however you want. And then I will also share the link to this recipe, as well as we did, Mike Wright-Boy and I did make during the beginning of the pandemic, I was doing a lot of cooking demos in the kitchen, and I did actually make a version of this, so I'll share that video as well if anybody wants the sort of step-by-step. You do want to let it sit at least 10 minutes before you cut it, which it's done. So why don't you read that little section about the Cupid's Lasagna for us?
Sure. delicious, my mother tries. Thank you. Happy floats like a dandelion seed above the tension that has arisen around her presence. She bubbles at the compliment, floats a smile in my direction. It was my mother's recipe, she says. She called it Cupid Lasagna because it tastes so good you'll fall in love. That's cute, Jillian says. It's nice to know the only one whose first impression isn't going to exacerbate the unease of this situation finds Happy amusing. Happy lifts her fork and goes in for a chunk of her slice. Dig in, everyone. The entire table follows suit, and a moment later, mouths chew up and down amidst a cacophony of swallowing. Something inexplicable happens. Almost as soon as pasta hits taste buds, shoulders slacken, tightened faces begin to loosen, and expressions soften. Every person in the room humanizes. People smile, converse even.
That's great. So I want to show you the lasagna here.
Oh, that looks delicious.
And I'm going to walk up, show you all the lasagna. So you can see, hopefully you can see the layers of the, oops.
Can you just tilt down a little bit? There you go.
There we go, okay. It's always tricky because it's backwards when I'm looking at. So you might be able to see the little layer of green in there. There's 2 layers of the spinach. And so I'm going to taste this in a second, but that scene had so much tension. His parents are there, his therapist and the therapist's wife are there, and then this colorist and the colorist's like new girlfriend are there. So it's like, you know, this super awkward set of people, and Happy's doing her best to try to make everything work. And I put on these kind of funky earrings because I thought they would be something that character might wear. And I also put on this fun little tomato apron because I totally could see her in some funky apron trying to kind of do this domestic thing amidst all this tension and underlying stuff that's going on with these characters. So I know we don't want to reveal too much, but he does go outside, right? So we do know that at some point he goes outside. Can you just tell me when you were working up to that scene, because it really is the climax of the book, you know, that scene is so beautifully written and so gripping. You know, how did you decide like where he was going to go? Like, I don't want you to tell us what happens, but how did you decide where he was going to go? And I know you must be near Denver because it seemed like you're very familiar with Denver. Tell us just a little bit about that scene while I taste the lasagna.
Yeah, so, you know, I am familiar with Denver. I grew up in Littleton, which is a suburb of Denver. I've been in Colorado my whole life. So Denver is sort of my playground, if you will. And that area where his apartment is and where he eventually walks to is an area that I've spent a lot of time in, that I feel like I know pretty intimately. And I think that was really important to be able to write that scene because, you know, as you can imagine, somebody going outside for the first time in 5 years, just the sheer sensory overload of that experience, you know, I wanted to really hone in on all the little details of sights and sounds and smells. And so having him go what is actually a fairly short distance that he walks in that time period just allowed me to really dig into all those, you know, all those little details that I think we take for granted when we're out and about in the world all the time. But somebody who's really seeing it, you know, almost for the first time, at least in a long time, is going to take notice of everything.
Yes. And it was so cinematic, and I just felt like I was watching, because you really feel like you're in his skin, but also I could see like there's a camera move that they do where they pull focus, so they're moving forward, but they're pulling back, so it has this sort of dizzying sort of quality, and I felt like, oh, that must be what that feels like. And just the idea of he has to cross a bridge, which I'm sure you did on purpose. And I'm just noticing you have a character named Angel, you have a character named Happy. So you've kind of added these layers of lightness to this somewhat dark character story. And we are for sure rooting for him to go outside and to successfully complete this sort of mission that he sets for himself.
Sure.
Let me just tell you about the lasagna. Yes, this is also a cooking show. So it's super creamy. What I used is I soak cashews and then I blend them with eggs and Italian seasoning, a salt-free Italian seasoning. So that replaces either the bechamel or the ricotta layer, which kind of makes it all meld together. Light use of, in this particular batch, of mozzarella, but there's definitely mozzarella in there. And then I used the gluten-free noodles. I did a whole bag of fresh spinach, and then I added some garden oregano and basil. So that green layer has a lot of like nice herby notes. And then this particular sauce, this Mama Capra sauce, is from another show that I watch and listen to. And it's the best sauce I've ever made. Like, it's one of the best recipes I've ever made. It's super garlicky and really easy. And so I had that up in the freezer, so I was super excited to be able to thaw that and use that. And it's uncooked noodles, so you use either a watery sauce or a little bit of extra water so that it all absorbs. So I actually made it the night before, had it in the fridge, and then baked it this morning. So it's also a nice bake-ahead or make-ahead recipe. And my group boy and I love lasagna, so it's always exciting when we can turn the oven on here. It's been very warm this month, but it's exciting to be able to have that. So any last words? I know your pub day is Monday, so we're super excited for you. And where can they find the book? Is there an audio book, did you say? I'm trying to remember.
There is an audiobook, and as you can imagine, hearing Wesley's voice from this male narrator who does the audiobook and who's just phenomenal is actually a really fun way to listen to it. So if you're an audiobook person, you can find it on Amazon or any of the other audiobook apps, and I definitely recommend that. It's also available in paperback and ebook. You can find it on Barnes & Noble. You can find it on Amazon, and then, of course, through the Propertius Press website as well.
Great. So that's a lot of places to look for this great book, but I really highly recommend it. It was something that I don't think I would have read if I wasn't doing this show. And not because there's anything at all wrong with it. It's just I don't read a ton of fiction, and so I was so captivated in the story. And I also do feel like there's just so many parallels with the pandemic. So it felt like kind of the perfect novel. And it sort of also reminds us like to not take things for granted. So like being able to go outside, being able to go out and buy your own groceries, those kinds of things kind of brings that into relief. So I want to congratulate you on Pub Day and a really beautiful first novel. So great job. You can find her at stephanieharperauthor.com. You can follow me at SWeaverMPH. And if you're watching this on IGTV or YouTube, you're going to need to hop on over to Facebook, Stephanie Weaver MPH, to get the recipes because they're only there on my page there. And if you think you know anyone who either loves lasagna, loves fiction, or you think would like this particular book, please do share this video. It really helps people find these books. We started this show to support authors primarily with smaller and independent presses during the pandemic, but just to like get the word out about books that don't have a big budget behind them, but are still super worth reading and sharing. So Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.